We often have a little bit of conflict between love and law. Kind of comes out like that. Have you ever heard somebody say, or even maybe you have said something like this, well, I really like the God of the New Testament, but the God of the Old Testament is all about laws and rules, and like there's two different gods. We say things, hear things like that. Maybe said it, maybe even believe that. But scripturally, there is no opposition between law and love. We have to learn how to kind of think like that. And it's different because, we think, oh, love is so sweet. No, it's not. Love is not always very sweet. Okay? Those of you who are raising children know that love is not always sweet. Okay? Because you're acting just like they're acting like you did when you were children as well. And it's kind of a burden sometimes. We pick up that first reading right near the end of Moses' life. It's in Deuteronomy, which actually means the second law. And he's getting ready to die, and he does an interesting thing. If we go back to chapter 6, and I'm jumping a little bit here, Moses is reading the law. He's gone down the Ten Commandments. We all know those. And then he starts the Shema. The Shema is a beautiful prayer. It is one of probably the most favorite of all the prayers of the Jews. Jewish men would pray this prayer at least 3 times a day. And I remember a rabbi was telling me, he was giving a lesson on this to some children. And he starts off, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one." And a little girl jumped up and said, was waving her hand, and what is it? When is he going to be 2? But that, "Hear, O Israel," Shema, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength." And if you ever go to a Jew's home, especially if they're conservative or Orthodox, you will see on their doorstep or on the door lintel, there's going to be a little glass vial like this, and about this big or so, and it's up on the side of the door. And the best thing to do, and the honorable thing to do, is to kiss the mezuzah. It's called a mezuzah. Because in that little vial is that very saying from Deuteronomy chapter 6. Love the Lord with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength. And then he continues now from chapter 6 all the way up to chapter 28 now, and he is explaining how the Ten Commandments are actually put into practice. These dictums say, okay, this is the commandment, but this is how we live those commandments. It's one thing to have a set of rules, laws, but it's how we actually make them part of our lives. And you heard some of that today. And God's, it's tough. If you're not taking care of the widows and the orphans, I will come down and smite you. That's a law, to take care of the poor and the needy. It's a law. If you go further into the next book of the Bible, Leviticus, you get into chapter 19. And in chapter 19, you have that beautiful voice, you have to love your neighbor as yourself. That's not a New Testament thing. That's in the book of Leviticus. In fact, one of the laws of Leviticus is when you come to harvest time, you never harvest your whole crop. It doesn't belong to you. Take a few rows of the produce, and you do not harvest that. That is for the stranger and the poor. See, God, right there, God said, you don't own everything. And so love your neighbor as yourself. So that's how we live the law. It's not a conflict. It is love. How many of you parents, and and I'm glad you do this, you make laws in your household. You make a law. And you say, do not run out into the street. That's a good law. You're trying to save your children. That's what God does. So that law is not just something, arbitrary. It is something that saves lives. So the law and love go together. We must not, say, well, here's the law and here's love. That's nonsense. That's nonsense. Law and love are right here. And we're challenged by God to actually live that way. And we hear Jesus, today when he gives the almost exactly what Moses said. The greatest love. You must love your God with all your mind, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. Same, just almost exactly the same. But we also have to love God in our mind. We have to really begin to put into our mind the very mind of God. And we could only do that with love. And it's not easy to do that. Back when Pope Benedict XVI wrote his first encyclical, his wasn't Pope very long, and he wrote, Deus Caritas Est. God is love. And it's a beautiful encyclical. If you have not read it, I would hope this week that you would just look it up on the internet. It's very simple. Just go to Benedict XVI, Deus Caritas Est, or God is Love. It's a beautiful encyclical. And he gets some of this stuff together. And a few years after that, he wrote another one called Caritas in Virtute, Love in Virtue. But we have this wonderful scholar who begins to hit this very point, that loving God, now it's different than loving others as we love ourselves. It's a different kind of love. To love God with all my heart, with all my mind, with all my soul, with all my strength. That's different than loving my neighbor as myself. So God has to come first. Has to come first. Otherwise, the second's not going to work at all. If you put anybody, if you put your wife, your husband, your children, your parents, if you put them before God, then what happens is I become God. Either God is first or I am. There's no middle ground. I mean, there's a fine line there. And to the extent that I love God, that determines how I can love my neighbor. But I have to do that first, to put God first. And that means we have to love the mind of God. In our mind, we must love. You say, well, isn't that the heart? No, the mind as well. I don't know how many people know who Frank Sheed is. He was, back in the 40s and 50s, he and his wife established Sheed and Ward Publishing, and he was a great little apologist for the faith. And somebody was questioning him, and I don't know if he was arguing, but questioning about, why do I have to take these theology classes? Why do I have to read these books and things? He had this wonderful little retort. It would be a strange God who we could love better by knowing him less. You can't do that. If we love God, then we're gonna our whole life is to keep striving to know the mind of God and to make my mind more in the plan of God. So this week, read those 2 encyclicals, or maybe one this week and one the next week. They're not that long. But don't read it just for words. Read it, see, how can I know God's mind even better? How can I love God in my mind, not just my heart? Because that's how God loves us, with his mind and his heart. In many ways, it's the way you love your children, your spouse. But we have to do that all the time. There is no conflict between law and love. I'm not talking about, speed limits, and we can argue about, is this policy for taxes, is that the best policy? That's not what I'm talking about here. But you know that every one of you, myself included, had a mom or dad yell at us, don't play in the street. Don't do that, because I want you to be safe. And when we get to, and we didn't maybe buy into it when we were 7 or 8 or 9, but when we're older, we know. That is not just a rule. It's, I love you. I love you, my son, my daughter. That's beginning to understand the mind of God.